Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Dahl. I am a certified financial planner with AFS Financial Group and a very proud volunteer member of the board of directors for Wider Circle. Excited to be here today with my friend, mentor in many ways, Mark Bergel, um, the CEO and founder of A Wider Circle. I met Mark actually when I was a senior at American University and had the opportunity to intern with him. We were working out of Mark's living room at the time in the very beginning stages of A Wider Circle. And it has been incredible to see the difference he and everyone at A Wider Circle has made in this community and the impact on so many lives they have had. The positive impact would never have been possible without the thousands of volunteers and financial donors who have supported A Wider Circle over the years. We came up with the idea for this webinar because we here at AFS in particular believe in charitable gifting and the positive impact it has on people's lives and the economy as a whole. And so we're going to hear from Mark to not only learn about the impactful work of A Wider Circle, but to also hear about ways we can all be more impactful with our giving, whether that be with our time, our talent, or our treasure, as a lot of people like to say. And then at the end of our discussion with Mark, I'm also going to share just a handful of slides with a few tax-efficient charitable giving strategies that we frequently help our clients with. I also like to recognize that it isn't really the tax deduction that incentivizes our clients or most people for giving, but really their desire and want to do good. And so our role is to help our clients use this pension to do good, to benefit themselves and the charities and causes that they are passionate for. So without further ado, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always good to catch up with you. So let me just start with asking you to tell us a little bit about the mission of A Wider Circle and why it's so important.
Well, thanks, Jason. I appreciate your kind of leadership of the organization from the first day. I mean, everything you've done has been great, other than I think we played basketball one early day in a break. I remember schooling you, but we won't go into that detail. I think we thought it was going to go the other way, but it went one way. Anyway, I started the Wider Circle because I was frankly embarrassed by how we were allowing people to live in our midst. Here in our nation's capital, everywhere in the region, there are pockets of poverty that reflect a real lack of connection in our society, and to me, a lack of compassion. And so I don't look at this as charitable work. I look at it as social justice work. And even in today's environment where social justice is more front and center, I believe people in poverty are still marginalized and exploited. And so I think that what A Wider Circle does is perhaps more important today than ever. And what I mean by that is we need to shine a light, and we need to have places to go with our time and with our talents and our treasure that can change the way of life for millions of people, people who were born into poverty, as opposed to being at fault for some reason for their poverty, which we tend to, I think, sometimes disconnect because we feel like, well, maybe they're doing something that causes their poverty. And most of the time, and by that I mean over 90% of the time, people are born into poverty, and the economic mobility in our country works well for people who are, in the 2 or 3 or maybe 4 quartiles, but not in the lowest quintile, I should say. Very difficult to rise out of poverty, very difficult to see economic mobility. So everything we do is to try to help them get to a place where they can rise up.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm curious to hear, sort of from your perspective and the work of Wider Circle doing, throughout this pandemic, kind of the brighter light, if you will, that's really been shown on a lot of the issues that we're seeing. What's the perspective you've kind of seen?
Yeah, it's no surprise. Anytime we've had a crisis, we've been around 19 years. So the 2008 recession was an economic crisis that had some comparison to today. And what we saw then was a lot of people who were not in poverty fall into it, or fall into need, I should say. And when they fell right on top of people who were already in poverty. And what that meant was that getting help was harder for people in poverty, because the people who were newly in need, if you will, had more network to access, had greater networks to access, and were able to, for example, communicate well to get food assistance or financial assistance, and that made it harder for people who are already in poverty to get that. So what we've seen now is that because of a lack of connection, I think people are more socially isolated than ever. So a wider circle has, instead of 3-minute conversations with people every day, 30-minute conversations where they share the stress, the emotional stress, the physical stress that the social isolation has on them. And then I think we think about as well, one of the things a wider circle does, what we do extremely well, is furnish homes. So we get your furniture, anybody in the community who has extra stuff and can bring it to us that's in dignity condition, right? We then get that into people's homes, and we can just, imagine having to stay at home in a home that had nothing. So all day
Yeah.
you're on the floor and you're sitting, sleeping, eating on the floor, as opposed to almost a more convenient, kind of lockdown for people who have beds, couches, tables, and chairs, and somebody to bring
Yeah.
them food if they want to just order it. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
everything gets accentuated more during a time like this. And so poverty and a family's poverty gets accentuated more. So more of a call to action for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I've thought about that a lot, even before the pandemic and through over the years with the work Wider Circle, and just that tangible, right? Imagine coming home, right, with my family and my wife and I and my kids not having a bed to sleep in, or not having a table to sit at, or you know, even a table to put a TV on, and just it always kind of makes my heart sink to think about anyone living in that, and as you said, just imagine being in quarantine and not having the basics of a dignified home. And so yeah, that's always it's awesome the work to be able to help folks at that level, that to help with a dignified home, to rise up out of poverty, to start from there. That's always I've always felt felt a strong sense to that component. But tell us more, about just a little bit of the sort of the reach of a wider circle in this region, kind of the programs, and then maybe one step further, the ways in which a lot of the volunteers do engage with the wider circle.
Sure. I'll try to answer that. I just want to say one more thing too, is that your kind of emotion that, your heart sinks when you hear that. I think that only matters for all of us if we actually act on it, right?
Act on it. Yep.
And I think the difference between thoughts and words and actions are where a wider circle comes in. And do we restrict, the name of a wider circle is based on this notion that we can't restrict our compassion to those few nearest us, that we must deeply care about people whom we may not know, but
Yep.
who are, a part of our lives, even if we don't see it every day. But a wider circle right now, thinking about how many homes we furnish the homes of about 16,000 children and adults every year. The pandemic will lower that number, but we're still serving. So
Hmm.
whereas we used to furnish 20 homes a day, now we're furnishing between 10 and 15 homes a day. So it's pretty awesome what the team is doing.
Yeah.
And they're doing it masked with physical distancing. But that's what we do, about 10 to 15 homes a day. We're helping, this year we'll help thousands of people, even during the pandemic, with their job training, with getting ready to enter the workforce or advance in their career. So we're doing Zoom job training classes instead of in-person job training classes. And we're doing Zoom and phone one-on-one consultations instead of in-person consultations. And that workforce development is really our main focus for education. And we've seen obviously that nobody gets out of poverty without a job. And so we have programs that I think are really strong, and we're just going to look to expand that scope. But in both of those programs, the essential support, which is the furnishing of homes, and the job training, our geographic reach is the entire capital region. So Washington, D.C., Montgomery, Prince George's, and Baltimore City, in that order, are the four most popular places that people come from: D.C.,
Hmm.
Montgomery, Prince George's, and Baltimore City. But about 18 counties in Maryland people come to us from, and all of Northern Virginia. So it's quite a reach in terms of whom we serve. And it's equal in terms of who comes and donates their time or their money or their stuff. And to the latter, we typically have 30,000 volunteers a year, which is a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's very common to see 100 people show up in a given day. With the pandemic, we're somewhere between 5 and 20 volunteers a day. So there's definitely opportunities to volunteer or to do drives for items, whether it's laundry detergent or furniture from home, and then drop those things off. There's just no way that we won't have something for you to do if you want to engage.
Yes, yeah, I have seen that firsthand. And so the offices and showroom for Wider Circles in Silver Spring, and it's the showroom is really a combination of furniture, um, toys for kids, children's clothing, dishes, all the necessities, right? The basics that I know at least I often kind of take for granted, right, to have in my home, as well as a professional development center where folks can come, I say, quote unquote, shop, right, to get professional clothing for free, and it is beautiful.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And it reminds me too that we also do have a center in Southeast DC. In fact, we're
Yeah, I
building
wanted
it
to.
right now.
Yeah.
So we have some really strong neighborhood programming that we are developing. We've been serving in DC in communities that are pretty much service deserts, whether it's Barry Farm or the Highlands community, which is where we're building the center in Washington Highlands. So we're excited about that program, and that's a center that will be built within a month or two. And it'll be a hub for our inner city programming. And we go there because we were asked to go there because there's a dearth of services and a high level of need. But I'm also glad you mentioned toys because we have a really great holiday program. So if anybody out there wants their company or their family to sponsor another family or to just help with our holiday program, gosh, we usually end up providing gifts for 10,000 kids. So very active holiday program. But other than that, the center in Silver Spring is a place to drop off anything from new toiletries like toilet paper, new cleaning supplies, and laundry detergent, and then dressers, beds, tables, chairs, dishes, pots, pans, sheets and towels, televisions, lamps, end tables, coffee tables.
Yeah. So in addition to folks being able to drop off, right now you're doing it by appointment, correct?
Yeah, except on the weekends. You can just show up on the weekends.
Okay, great. But otherwise, it's 7 days a week. But so drop off just to come as you can on weekends, but make appointments during the week.
Yeah.
And then, what's the current numbers for folks? Can anyone do have pickups at their house right now?
Yeah, it's we're trying to do it in a safe way, right? So if the stuff can be isolated for a period of, I think it's 48 hours, you can write to us, contact CONTACT at awidercircle.org, and just ask any of those questions, and we'll get back to you right away. But if the items are isolated and not in the midst of other people for an extended period of time, then we can pick them up. We did some curbside pickups, so we're slowly getting back into it, but we're still in what we call our phase one of operations, which is to say keeping our staff safe so we do no harm while we're trying to do good. But that's kind of how it works.
Yeah. So shifting gears slightly to kind of from a donor's perspective, would love to get a little bit of insight for given your experience. One, just from a Wider Circle's perspective, sort of give us a high level breakdown of kind of the budget. I think there's oftentimes a misunderstanding from some folks that they think like a lot of nonprofits budget. Oh, a lot of that comes from corporations or from government funding, and I think in some cases folks discount or don't fully appreciate how much individual donors make up for a lot of nonprofit budgets. So maybe you could share a little insights on that.
Well, I can give you just a little bit. I mean, only 19 years of insight, day-to-day grassroots fundraising, which is I've seen. I think you were with me too. I used to keep track of who donated on a Microsoft Word document.
Yeah.
Then you said, no, that's not going to work. We're going to go get QuickBooks, and so. But individuals and families make up 50% of our donors, of our financial donors. So they are the bread and butter. Everything we do is because of community members or individuals in the community, people who donate a couch and then $50 at the end of the year, who have a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, and their child somehow is just so tuned in to the importance of connection with human beings that they donate $1,000 of their bar mitzvah money. People who Don't get wedding gifts, eschew the wedding registry, and just set something up for a wider circle. I mean, there's so many ways that individuals do it, and I think it has spread well. But if we're going to end poverty, which to me is the only goal to have with this, we can do it. It's just a matter of kind of will and vision. Then I think more of us are going to have to make those decisions to say, I've got enough, everything's good. I even have enough money, and I know that I can do something better with these dollars that will allow me to, if I can't show up, I can at least, help out.
Mm-hmm.
So many people, and the amount of giving, I do have to say that I watch people send in checks or make online donations, and I am blown away by the generosity. So I'm always in this kind of paradox of we need to do more, and wow, I can't believe what people are doing. It's so great.
Yeah.
Paradox going
on. Yeah, and I mean, I think you touched on just a couple items, just kind of the mechanics of giving, right? A lot of people, more and more folks give online, whether that's a wider circle or any charitable organization. There's still a lot of folks who mail checks.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to actually talk a little bit later about kind of the potential tax advantages of donating appreciated securities, but that is also a way that folks contribute. Any other ways, just kind of the mechanics of it, that from your perspective,
Yeah,
Matt?
I think a lot of employees, I remember in the 1980s when health and fitness was the focus of corporate, of the extras, the extracurricular corporate activity. Hey, build us a gym and I'll come work for you if your, health program's better than the others. And by that, I mean kind of fitness. I think in the last 15 years, I've seen that employees are demanding that their companies are engaging in socially conscious activities. And so there's volunteer days that are paid for instead of health and fitness activities that are paid for. And that's one thing you can do is you can encourage your company to engage. And so there are lots of companies. I mean, we've met a lot of people like Tiedemann Advisors, which not only, said, hey, we want to be on your board, but we want to give workshops. So just last night, or 2 nights ago, they gave a workshop to a group of clients of ours on financial management. It was great. And they were just so connected to it. And so you can encourage your companies to give. I think corporate engagement has grown and is an opportunity. I recognize the challenge of the economy today, especially for small businesses, but small and large are challenged. But when we get back on our feet, there's going to be an explosion of energy, right? And so I hope it goes in the direction of now let's do some real good for the people you mentioned earlier who are struggling the most during the pandemic. But back to your question, we use Network for Good for online giving, and Network for Good, it's like a 3%, which is very competitive. And we've had them since the beginning. And so it's really easy to give that way. For people who want to give a lot, and so let's say somebody wants to give $10,000 and they don't want $300 to go to the kind of the fee, if you will, then they tend to write a check. So that's tended to be how it breaks out, but we still have a lot of our supporters who are, using the regular mail.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
So you mentioned something that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Hear some of your experience and insight on how can all of us be more informed with our giving, and to feel confident that our giving is going to be impactful.
Boy, that's a question for a 3-hour conversation.
Yeah.
I do, one of my stressors, I'd say, being in the nonprofit sector is not seeing more outcomes. You know me, I'm intense about outcomes, and so I don't think we see a lot. I think that I've been in too many meetings where people have said, well, we gave you $300,000. What were the outcomes? And I'll hear an organization say, we did one group meeting, or we have meetings every, and the stress for me is that people in poverty don't see, I think, the outcomes of the enormous number of programs and the enormous amount of money that's thrown into poverty work. I feel like we probably accept low outcomes more than we should. And so I think if you're giving dollars, I would try to find out what's the outcome. If I give you $1,000 or I give you $25,000, what's going to happen? So at the wider circle, we have different types of programs. So we can say, look, we're going to furnish this many homes for this amount of dollars. I can promise you that every $450 you give, you'll be able to see how a home was furnished, right? There's no charge to the clients, but that's the cost of our operations, if you will, to furnish a home. I'd say that we're going to try to build better outcomes measures into our neighborhood programming. That's something that we've invested in even more so this year, is our evaluation and measurement. And it depends on what the organization you're supporting is doing. But I think insisting on outcomes for government programs and insisting on outcomes for nonprofit programs where there's tax breaks for the donation is, to me, it's part and parcel of this. And we should in the nonprofit sector be ready to show our outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, you should ask for them. And that doesn't mean it has to be, okay, that community is now no longer impoverished. It can be something as basic as, cool, that family now has beds, dressers, tables, and chairs. That's what it means to me. Or I've fed this many people. But I think more than the outputs, let's focus on the outcomes. And I'm trying to, refine my approach to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, I think, whether it's our charitable giving or so many things in our life, right? Focus on the outcomes. And in the nonprofit world, I think the most common sort of criteria or measure gets sort of reported on or talked about is, oh, well, what percentage of your budget goes to that kind of, I'm going to call it infamous line item of overhead, right? In my experience, I'm curious to hear your perspective, is, well, yes, that is a valuable data point, right? To have some insight to say, hey, at least this organization isn't, right at the beginning, sort of being wasteful with their money. But that's a very limited view to really understand, because that's not giving us any insight into what you described as the outcomes, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, maybe 97% of it's going to your programs, but are your programs any good? Right? Are your programs effective?
Yeah. I think so. I think that, again, I really focus on our people getting out of poverty. And that's kind of a tough nut to crack in some ways. We're not structurally aligned to do that, which, as you know, is why I'm focusing on structural work in my life going forward. But I still think that we have built a bit of a nonprofit industrial complex. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see the corporate sector get into that as they become more engaged in socially conscious work, to just kind of contribute to doing well, as opposed to let's accomplish things. That's why this is not charitable work, it's social justice work. And if it's social justice work, we know that the time for justice is always right now, right? It's not like, oh yeah, it's too bad that many kids get shot in low income communities every night. Let's try to reduce that by 10%. It's not okay, right? If it were our kids living in those communities, zero number of shootings is the number that we would accept. And so I think all of us who engage, whether through our volunteering or our giving, can really make sure that we're saying, okay, what's going to happen with these dollars? And I'm going to give where the outcomes are going to be what I would want for my family. And I guess that's what it comes back to with this notion of connection, right? Do I feel the pain? And you feel the pain, Jason. I think that's why you stayed in this for 19 years as well. And I think that we all need to feel it, but let that, catalyze us, and let that make sure that we engage with commitment. There's a big difference between contributing and committing. Dollars are huge to an organization like a Wider Circle. If you can do nothing but write $1,000 check, that's heroic. That's a lot of money. Any money that means something to you is going to be significant to us as well. I hope it's part of a continuum. And so that's why I think our work in the future should also be talking with businesses and saying, as you make your CSR decisions, let's look at outcomes for that. So you don't spend all your money on volunteering to a cause that may not be equal to what you want to accomplish.
Right.
For all of us, enlarge our vision, have a bigger vision of what is possible.
Yep. Yeah. In our world here at AFS, right? What's our ROI? What's our return on investment in that regard?
Right. Exactly right.
Yep. Well, there's you personally and a Wider Circle, some really exciting things. You talked about it briefly a moment ago. Talk a little bit about what the future holds, and being able to have a bit greater impact in the structural change that you mentioned.
I think, I'm really excited because our team has responded to the pandemic in about as strong a way as is possible. It's so stressful for each individual. So I know that our organization is our people, and we are bringing on some new staff right now as I speak. We have a few folks who will be starting in the next couple of weeks. That's always going to elevate the operations, right? So I'm excited for how at our site in Silver Spring, we will add our human capacity, and we're doing renovations as well. So Donahoe Construction has come in, and at no profit to them, they're leading a renovation project that we're really excited about. The state of Maryland is offering some bond bill support. And so you'll see our physical structure change so that we can serve up to twice as many families by the way we reconstruct the facility. So I'm excited about that. It will also make our job training facility, that beautiful spot you mentioned with the professional clothing, it'll make that nicer. So we should see more people being able to gain assistance and have their homes furnished. And then our center that we're building in Southeast DC is also going to mean that we can be there in a more effective manner for the people who live in the deep poverty that this area has, where almost every family is struggling in different communities, and that concentrated poverty is never good. So for us to be able to be there, to be behind people, to find out what they think they need, and then support them, that's what's next for us. And so the coming year is very exciting for me. And I will just say finally that workforce development and people being able to get back into the job market, that is an area in the nonprofit sector that is not on the whole across the country effective. We have a lot of programs, but we don't have a lot of outcomes. And a lot of people in poverty will tell you, hey, I want to take that program, but is there really a job at the end of it? Because I've taken a lot of programs. I've been in programs and there's no job at the end, or jobs are promised and then not delivered. And so I actually think, Jason, that will result from stronger connections with employers and the nonprofit organizations than to the actual people who need those jobs. So we're going to work on all three of those things. And I think that our staff will lead the next era of a wider circle will be a really exciting one. So it will be a strong investment. I can tell you that much.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm going to take this opportunity to actually just sort of shift gears a little bit and just talk for a few minutes around, and I'm going to share my screen here, do a few slides, and just talk a little bit about some of the tax efficient strategies for giving that we help with clients that we touched on a little bit with Mark. And I'm going to get a little wonky and in the weeds in my world, but it's going to be shallow weeds because for the just going to kind of scratch the surface here on a few things, and so hopefully encourage anybody to reach out with questions or comments as we move forward here. So I think I have my screen share up here. Is that working for you, Mark?
Yeah, it looks good. Nice
okay.
Image.
All right. Thanks. Good. All right. So as I mentioned, just going to cover a handful of what I call sort of tax efficient strategies, and some of this has changed in recent years with the tax law change that happened back in 2018. That seems like a really long time ago now, but there are some strategies to work around the new tax laws. So here is the tax planning strategy that many people refer to as bundling. So it's basically what we're talking about is bundling your deductions, and it's the process of lumping payments you would make over multiple years into 1 year. And in a moment, Mark, I'll be curious to sort of see if you've seen this come to fruition a little bit, where folks are essentially saying, because of kind of the change in the tax law that adjusted the standard deduction level, basically doubled it a couple years back. So fewer people are itemizing their deductions, and more people are now taking a standard deduction. So here's where the bundling comes in. So it allows you to itemize your deductions in certain tax years. Now, so we are primarily seeing this used with charitable contributions, but the same concept can be used for taxpayers with a substantial amount of deductible medical expenses. And we have a great example on the next slide. Before I go to that next slide, just curious, Mark, have you kind of seen this play out much?
Yeah, not really, Jason.
Yeah.
We have not seen a dramatic difference in giving, even in when people are giving. This year, with the uncertainty, some people kind of gave more in the spring to say, hey, I recognize this is really stressful. So that's what we saw, some differences. So we're concerned with end of year giving, but I haven't seen a lot of bundling. It's the first I've really looked at it, Jason.
Sure. Yeah, so here's an example that hopefully kind of help clarify a little bit of what I was talking about, just sort of giving some of the numbers. So basically just saying, hey, if you look over a 2-year period, right, and you can sort of use this sort of in a rolling basis going forward in any 2-year period, you say, oh, hey, my wife and I, if we typically give, let's just say $10,000 a year to charity, and we have other deductions totaling $13,000, that total would bring us to $23,000 of potential itemized deductions. Well, under the current tax law, that, as I mentioned before, the standard deduction has been increased, and so in 2020, for a married couple, the standard deduction is $24,800. So in that case, they would not, their charitable giving, while it would still fulfill their, right, their desire to give and their primary motivation to give, it's actually not providing any tax benefit in that example, because you're going to take the higher of the two, the total of your itemized or the standard. And in this example, in both of those years, the standard deduction would be higher. So on the right side of the screen is just an example of considering bundling. So if somebody said, hey, I'm still going to give 20,000, but I'm going to do it all in 1 year. So you see here in this example, did it all in 2019. So they have 33,000 of total itemized deductions. So in 2019, they will take the itemized deduction because that's higher than the standard. But in 2020, they would go back to taking the standard deduction. And so you hear sort of the 2-year total, you see that difference. So that's just one kind of potential strategy depending on somebody's kind of charitable giving plan. Another area, and I know a wider circle sees this, and many charities see this. This has become more and more common. Is for donors, in lieu of just kind of writing a check or going online and making a donation, essentially donating your cash. You can also donate appreciated securities. Now here we're going to focus just on stocks as that appreciated security, but it can be other forms of appreciated assets. So it's basically a real simple concept. So as a donor, let's just say you were going to you wanted to give $10,000 to your charity. In lieu of giving $10,000 of cash, right, or writing a check or going online, you can say, you know what, I have stock worth $10,000, and I'm going to donate that stock. And in this example, this stock, it needs to be held. You need to have held it for at least a year, so be long-term holding. And then in this case, also have a gain in it, right? So if in this example it had a basis, so the gain of $7,500, so basis of $2,500, it's now worth $10,000. So if I were to sell that, I would have to pay capital gains taxes on that $7,500. So instead, I can just donate the stock to the charity. The charity, as a tax-exempt organization, can then sell the stock, not pay any taxes, and they get the same impact of the gift, right? They get $10,000. You get the same impact as the giver. You get it to potentially take an itemized deduction of $10,000, the same as if you had given cash. So it's another great way to give and ways. So if you have a concentrated position, I think the example we see a lot now is Apple stock. Folks that are Apple stock may have grown a lot, and so they have may have an outsized exposure to Apple or any particular stock, and it may make sense to say, you know what, hey, I can fulfill my charitable giving goal. I can kind of diversify that position and save on taxes by not triggering capital gains by selling that position.
Yeah, we have seen more and more of that in the last few years. So it always means a lot because I know people take a lot of time to invest, right? It's a very thoughtful process.
It
and for
is.
them to make those gains, I recognize the tax savings, but it's a win-win.
Yeah, it is a win-win. That's what we look for. And I will say, pretty much every charity out there can and probably should have the ability. It's very simple, right? All they really need to do is just open a brokerage account of some form in the name of the charity. And then if you're the donor, you just contact that charity, ask for that brokerage account information, and then you provide that to your broker, or if you handle it yourself, to just push that money over. A very simple process. Another area that we've seen really pick up is the use of donor advised funds. Think of them similarly as a foundation, right? Like, I think probably the most famous is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So you can kind of think of it as your much lower cost version of a family foundation. And here, basically, you could create I could create, right, the Jason Dahl Donor Advised Fund. That entity itself is a tax exempt entity, right? So then I can potentially donate. I could donate cash to my donor advised fund. I could donate appreciated securities to my donor advised fund. And at the time that I donate into my donor advised fund, that's when I get the deduction, right, to potentially itemize at the value that I put into my donor advised fund. And then from there, you can distribute money out to the ultimate nonprofit or charitable organization or social justice organization that you want to support. You do not get a second deduction when you send it out of the donor advised fund. But these are really nice. Where we have actually seen it, maybe you're not seeing it on the front lines on your end, Mark, is that bundling strategy is being oftentimes combined with a donor advised fund. So folks, they can say, hey, you know what? I want to keep my regular schedule of giving to the charity, so I don't want the charity to be impacted. So you know what? I'm going to do that bundling strategy into my donor advised fund to maximize my itemized deductions, and then from there send the money out to the charities at the regular amounts and schedule that I was doing before. So that is kind of behind the scenes that we've helped a lot of clients do, and then you're sort of at the front lines as the not the end recipient. You may not be seeing that strategy as much.
I encourage it though.
Yeah. And I imagine, among the checks that you receive, some are labeled as somebody's donor advised fund.
For sure.
Yep, yep. And one of the questions we often get is, well, will the charity recognize that I was the ultimate donor, right? And so yeah, it should, if you chose to have your name in the name of the donor advised fund, it'll be there. But I know at least on the ones that we process, it also has the owner of that donor advised fund name is on the check as well. So that way, proper thanks can be recognized. I think yeah, we already covered all these items. We'll just move forward. So really, I think kind of the last item that we have helped a number of clients with over the years, it's a little not as prevalent this year because of the CARES Act that was passed that actually waived required minimum distributions, so people can have a 1-year exception to take this. But I know in prior years and in future years, I know this is going to be a common strategy too. And then we'll wrap things up here. So this is what we refer to as QCDs, or qualified charitable distributions. And so one of the ways that I like this strategy is if we go back to the first one in the bundling and kind of the, whether or not you're going to itemize or take the standard deduction. Well, if you're in a case where, gosh, I'm just not going to be I'm not going to be itemizing my deductions much anymore. I'm going to be hitting that standard deduction level, but I want to still be efficient in my giving. If you are subject to required minimum distributions, so previously it was when you turned age 70 and a half, under current law it's when you turn age 72, you can actually direct that required distribution out of your IRA to go directly to the tax-exempt charitable organization that you want to give. And instead of that being a taxable income to you as the IRA account owner, it just that income gets reduced, so you don't get taxed on it, but the gift goes directly to the charity. So just a couple mechanics there. You do want to make sure that check goes directly to the charity. You don't want it to come to you first and then go out to the charity. That'll mess up the strategy. And then the other kind of tip to be on the lookout is when you're filling out your taxes, you're still going to get that 1099 showing the full amount of the distribution, but then there's a subline where you need to say, oh, well, how much of it was actually taxable to you? So let's just say your total RMD was $100,000, but you had 20,000 of it sent out to a charity. Your 1099 would show 100,000, but then below that you would note that, hey, I only received 80,000, and that's the amount that would be taxable to you as the IRA owner. And it actually is, the IRS will allow those distributions up to $100,000 to go to charity. And yeah, so I'm gonna leave it there. Mark, do you have any other kind of closing thoughts or words of wisdom you'd like to share with folks for today?
Well, I think that sometimes people don't make the strong connection. I mean, we know that you need money to run a nonprofit organization, but they sometimes think nonprofit means you don't care about money. But obviously we know that money is what allows nonprofit organizations to function and to grow. And so for individuals, I always think the same as I do for corporations and foundations, which is to say, are we really in this together, right? And how together are we going to be in a time like now, where we see different levels of injustice, different levels of challenge? The question is not to be a pun on our name, but how wide will our individuals' circles of compassion be, and how committed are we to kind of being in this life together?
Well, thank you, Mark. Thanks for your time today and for all your passion and work. And I look forward to continuing to be with you
Yeah.
the
Thanks a lot,
years
Jason.
ahead.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Take care. Be safe, everyone.